You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
And welcome, folks. Yes, it is again, as I say every week, another week here at the Joe Dalton Show at Dublin South FM. Every week we try and bring you a new guest with a new opinion, a new point of view, a new way of looking at things. And this week I have a very good friend of mine, a friend and someone who has educated me, helped me unlearn the truth, helped me stand in my own shoes. And now that I look at the world, I see it for what it is. This person is Lisa Temple. Lisa is from Ireland. She is well educated. She speaks many languages and she has studied philosophy, history, and many, many other things. And she will explain that to us now in a minute over the last couple of decades. You will enjoy what Lisa has to tell us. Your jaw might hit the ground, but the truth is the truth, and knowing is unlocking so many doors for each and every one of us. Lisa, how are you?
I'm very well, Joe. Good morning, and it's great to see you face to face after so many hours of long chats on the phone.
Yes.
In this little world.
Throwing me off into the water. And when I ask a question and you, as you've always said, you know, everything is upside down and inside out. And it's been done that way, in my opinion, to hide who we are spiritually and why we are here as well. So, yes, thank you for the unlearning. The unlearning. That's it.
Well, that's very good. I don't think anybody can ever really teach anybody. And I think the very first conversation we had was the difference between information and knowledge. And we live in a world where we have a tsunami of information. And I always feel that information brings us out and further along, out of our path, out of our being. And we need to be very careful that we don't, it's like you're on a safe shore and information can bring you out to the ocean and you can forget, you know, who you are and everybody's opinion and every, you know, is often formulated for reasons that are not as obvious as we might think and are not very often in a benefit of growing us as a person, but rather fitting us into somebody else's agenda that might be more aware of where they want to go than where we actually are happier being.
The last probably month or so for me, the last couple of months, is really sort of understanding the world and being able to take full responsibility for my own individual life. And I think that is crucial for everyone. Like over the years, I've always believed, and for anyone who's ever saw my TEDx talk as well, you know, we focus on outwards and we should be focusing on what's inwards and what's inside. Because when we do that, all the stuff that's outside is irrelevant. Really, truly is. We project what we see. And, you know, you can either in this world live in doubt and fear and panic, or you can live in this world in love and joy and hope. And now hope is something that we can touch at another time. But those vibrations that we have, and it was the one thing that you said to me, you know, a couple of months ago was, you know, it's not about finding a higher vibration, but it's finding our own vibration. And that really resonated with me. That hit me. That was the thing that hit me and went, yes, that's there. And that's what it is. We're individuals here having some experience. I'm still haven't figured out what that is. But we're here and we might as well make the most of it because it is all just in part of a construct.
You've actually said an awful lot in just that bit, Joe, just to take the word, first of all, responsibility. I think the ability to respond requires you to know who you are, and knowing who you are should bring you to realization that you are home, you are safe, and you are enough. Now, the problem with that is it's very difficult to sell things to people who know they are home and safe and enough. And we live in a commercial-driven capitalist world. So every single thing that's been thrown at us at the moment, and probably since the day we were born and generations before that, has been very carefully administered to tell us the message that you are not home, you are not safe, and you are not enough. And from that position, then you are very easily manipulated or groomed into buying either ideology or concepts or products. And I think that has accumulated to such a crazy level at the moment that we are what it appears to be at the point of, a pinnacle of another empire. We are showing all the signs at the moment globally of what happened in previous empires just before they collapsed. And, regardless of how we perceive the powers to be as powerful, I don't believe that power is the same as force. And we are being forced into particular thought patterns and behaviors and groups and herds at the moment, which I don't feel, and I'm being careful with the use of my words here, not to dictate to anyone, I don't feel it's natural to the state of a human being. I don't think we are naturally as greedy, as cruel, as selfish, and as unified in the sense of everybody uniform as we are being presented and forced into at the moment. So that's on the responsibility word. To take personal responsibility is probably one of the most painful transitions that we can do, because it often requires a lot of shame processing, that wherever any of us are individually in our life at any point, good, bad, or indifferent, is as a result of choices that we have made. And when we look back, those choices were either made in reaction mode from a fear base, or we made, in as much as we could perceive, a conscious response. And we would often look back and say we would have chosen to do things differently or not. But the acceptance of where we are right now as individuals and as a species requires an enormous amount of personal responsibility.
I think what over the centuries, and how you talk about collapsing, like look at the Roman Empire, going back in democracy there, and we know democracy never really works. And I think even with the world as it is, the one thing that's popped up in my head was lack of. And I think that, people believe they have lack of, whatever that may be, which then is that drive of fear, and everything then escalated. And with everything we've seen, everything we do, everything, our education system, our TVs, our politics, everything, all is driven towards that fear and lack of. And if people can understand that and resonate with what that is, they can, in my opinion, I believe they have a better chance of changing it. But their blinkers are on, and they're being driven into a herd community because of the fear and the lack of. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I mean, the lack of, and that coming back to the home safe and enough, if you don't feel like you are home safe and enough, then you are starting off on a ground of lack of abundance, and lack of abundance gives fear, and fear makes into grabbing, and, we can never have enough. And then you move out of identifying your needs, and you move into a world of desire. And that bridge, I think, is very important between need and desire. And if you cross that bridge over to desire and you don't link it back to a need, then you're almost cutting off your connection to the wisdom within yourself to know what is for your betterment, and you're moving towards into a hunger which will never be satiated. So, for example, if I feel hungry at 12 o'clock and I see a Mars bar and I want a Mars bar, if I take that Mars bar and eat it, and I don't pause to say, okay, the desire is there as a Mars bar, and then connect into what do I need? And what I might need is a glass of water, or I might need to actually go and make myself something properly to eat, or I might be lonely, where food can actually feed a void. But if I continuously then say just taking food, if I continuously, every time I feel the hunger or the lack or the gape inside me, whether it's loneliness, whether it's fear, or whether it's just actual hunger, if I just continuously react to whatever is immediately put in front of me on an advertisement, a McDonald's or whatever, I suddenly go down a road where I will find it very difficult to actually look at what my body needs. So that's just an analogy of food, and that applies to everything else. But we are bombarded with images to say, buy this idea, buy this fear, and it's very profitable. Fear is very, very profitable, and so is a disconnected person. Is extremely easy to manipulate, to control, to bribe, to flatter, or to destroy. If you want to destroy a human being, you keep giving them what they want and don't give them a chance to pause and ask them what they need. It's the quickest way. And the human race has been destroyed by being consistently given and wants and told that these wants will equate to a sense of abundance, which it doesn't, because they're never satiated. And we've been caught up in those desires without any link back to our needs. And I think that's a very simplistic view of how we are where we are at the moment.
What's popping up in my mind when you're saying that is it all leads to addiction. And that addiction can be, created from desire, lust, pride, to temptation of something better.
Yeah.
And, an addiction can be just a thought of doing something to make you feel better inside. It's like that self-gratification by even speaking something or feeling something, making you feel better on it. And there is where the crux of humanity sits and lives, is the addiction. An addiction, but doesn't know what the addiction is.
Yeah, and I think the fundamental addiction is people are addicted to life, but they are afraid to live. Which is really, they're so afraid to die that they're afraid to live. And they think that everything that they see is all that there is, and they have to grab as much. But what we see, and we know this from science, is a tiny percentage of what actually exists in our limited perception and view of what is around us. Even we only see 7 colors on the spectrum, and we see 3-dimensional world. We know there's so much more around us, and that can create either a feeling of curiosity or a feeling of fear, or both. But the instant gratification, and I don't watch movies very much, but the Star Wars, I think, where the little man Yoda was asked, "Is the darker side more powerful?" And he said, "No, it's quicker, easier, and more seductive." And unfortunately, quicker, easier, more seductive does not lead to satisfaction, as Mick Jagger told us very clearly. So once you can create an environment where people are addicted to the instant gratification of any emotion that comes up, or to shove it down, or to buy something or eat something or do something rather than sit with an emotion, is going to be very profitable market for those who know how to manipulate that lack of connection.
It's interesting that you said that as well, because people are so frightened to live that they're happy to lock themselves into a box, that, or they're so frightened to die that they're fearful of living. And I think when you come to a spiritual realization that, and this is a lot of people that I would speak to that understand that they are spirit, that they are the ones that lose that fear of whatever is in this world that we call matter. And once you then can see that this world of matter is just an illusion in a way, and you are something bigger and greater and wonderful, then you start living again. And the people who are trapped inside their own bodies and fearful and not understanding that they are spirit. And that's, even though spirituality is so vast and X amount of people are religious in the world, they still don't get that whole life after death or whatever it may be, which I find fascinating in itself.
Yeah, I think the one of the first conversations we had is I said people need to learn how to pray and how to die. I think they are two of the biggest manipulations. The fear that people have of death, or even the obsession that they have of how they live now is going to either reward or punish them when they die, and that inbuilt belief system. But the other thing is words, there's so much words, there's so much information at the moment that it's very hard to, like at the moment you might have an audience here listening to this. Each single one of those people, if I was talking to them one-to-one, I would use a totally different set of language, or maybe not even language, maybe just the way you look at them, the way you lean towards them. Each person needs to be communicated to their own level. And I find that the deluge of information at the moment has actually undermined a lot of very beautiful phrases and words by overuse, and purposely so. There's very little sacred things left in the world, and there's very little reverence. This ideology of do as thou wilt without any consequences has become so perverse, and it used to exist in a very small group of powerful people in what would be called an occult world, and the occult meaning hidden. That's all occult means. So they would have had ways of communicating what they consider to be their elitist position, either spiritually, financially, or even bloodlines, whatever they want to perceive themselves. And what I've noticed is that those texts, that information has now been splashed out into absolutely everybody. And within it, there is always truth, but then you can tell 90% of truth, and then a small percentage twists the lie and do it in a way that can be mocking or overzealous, for example. And an audience will dismiss everything that's said because they're trained to dismiss a person. So I think the level of manipulation that's happening at the moment globally, where people are starting to say, well, what is going on? What is the truth? Those who are manipulating us and profiting from us and with their ideology are 10 steps ahead. And with the use of technology in the digital world, they have a pulse on the algorithm of the global consciousness, where they could create a crisis or a bomb or something in one place. And, within a short frame of time, through people's reactions on the internet, they can put a pulse and see how people are behaving. And then they can issue out press releases and manipulate that behavior. And I don't think people actually realize how much they're being manipulated. And that's quite frightening at the moment. It's almost as if there is a haze of hypnotism over people. And the last 3 years or 2 years have been an absolutely fascinating time to be alive, because yes, Roman empires fell and all empires have fallen, but they never had access to the global consciousness, at their fingertips in forms of high-end algorithms like they have now. So they have a lot more tools. And, historically, just before empires fell, a couple of things used to happen. Human spirit would rise up against the pyramidical, authoritarian system like it did in France, for example. And people would come together, and then always nature did something as well. So it's almost like these empire mind, this bulk type mind has learned, and it realized that, risings happened in churches when people got together outside schools or in family groups or in the local restaurant or pub. So they took all of that away from us, so that humans could not actually come together, connect in spirit, and maybe communicate and identify and say, no, this isn't right, and rise up. So they made sure that didn't happen, which to me is not a sign of power. It's a sign of utter, impotent, low-level, greedy, infantile, pathetic behavior. I don't like the word elite because it gives an idea that they're better than other people. I think the only thing that they are better is having an enormous black hole of unsatiable need that they are now trying to suck and hoover up everybody else into.
I would just call them gobshites.
I know a few gobshites that I would have more respect for.
Yeah, I have to think about that. Yeah, yeah. We can find something lower at the bottom of my shoe that we can every time we think of them, we can put them there.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
The two things, truth and lie, and even as you said, people were segregated and locked away, and I've even noticed that people even now, and they did a great job of it, because even people now at schools or in pubs, they're not really talking about it because there's that fear of upsetting or not getting involved or just getting along, where people won't communicate. But I also believe that human consciousness, people resonate around people, and it will be dropped out, and people are asking questions to people as signal to see where they are, and if they are on this unfortunate divide which both sides are feeding into. I think there will be a community base moving along, but the issue that it is, there's so much truth and lies mixed up into one conversation. People don't know what is what. Truth
and lies are, one person's truth can be another person's lie. So it's not as black and white as they'd like us to think. And perception is also very important. And I remember using an analogy that, if I was walking up a road and I saw a man standing with his back to me and up against a wall at 11:30 on a Friday night, and I kept walking by. And then the next day, I was called by the police and they said, "What did you see?" And I said, "Oh," in my mind will think, well, it was 11:30. He was coming back from the pub. Maybe he was peeing up against the wall. But then down the road, there might be somebody who looks and sees that actually standing in front of him is a woman, and he has his hand on her face. So when he's questioned, he's told, "Oh, I saw, a couple and they were kissing." But then down to the right, somebody else might have seen that he had a knife up to her chest, and he would say, "I saw somebody being murdered." So they're three truths with different perspectives. But then maybe up on the building behind me, there was a film crew and they were actually filming a scene for a movie. So they were all actors. So now you have four perceptions. Every one of them will say it's the truth. So we need to be very flexible in our beliefs. Beliefs are fluid. What we believe today might change tomorrow. And I think hanging on to a belief is a dangerous thing. Knowledge and knowing is very different. But I find that the things that I have known all my life are I'm least able to put words to it. I mean, you can say, for example, love, when you feel love for somebody, and you might find a song that can kind of resonate, or words, but nothing can ever, anything worth knowing, anything that is knowing, that is gnosis, that is knowledge, is beyond words and explanations. So all we can hope to do with words is to guide us into what is not real, and away from what's false. But you can't actually experience knowledge through words. It has to be felt.
Feeling. And I think that's where it is. I think it's a case of no longer using those words to express oneself, but it's actually just a feeling inside within your heart. And that's one of probably the hardest things for me was, hands folded, praying, and then realizing, stripping that all away because it's all just part of this construct, that it was actually just feeling. So it was like being an empty vessel until I understood what true spiritual spirit is. And once you get to that, I think this whole construct, this whole illusion of what we're all living in sort of falls apart, really falls apart.
Yeah, to sit still and feel fully is, in a world that keeps you distracted and moving and has so many distractibilities in it, is really difficult. And I don't know whether it's ever happened to you, but when you sit down, you feel an anger, for example, of what's happening, or an anger that, you see my daughters live for the last 2 years at a time where I was traveling the world at their age and I was free to go wherever I wanted. And, you see them being reduced in Trinity to doing their Trinity ball on a Zoom call in their bedrooms, and the anger that can feel. But to sit down with something like that and feel, if you feel anger fully, sitting still and really sit present with it, it expands and expands and expands. And then you drop through it. And what's under anger is grief. And when you expand through grief, you'll drop through that. And the ultimate then is the fear of death. And I have never feared death, and I've never comprehended why people fear death. And I think it's been my biggest struggle. Like I've always known at any point in my life, there were things that I would die for. I wouldn't shy away from something just because I could die, or I could be arrested, or those things just were never there for me, because the feeling of knowledge that I have of who I am, what life is, and it was so strong in me. And I thought everybody was like that. I think the last 2 years, I've had quite a shock at how much of oneself people are willing to give away in order to believe, to feel that they are part of a herd, or that the authorities will look after them, or will leave them alone. But the fear of being socially isolated, or the fear of shame, or the fear of losing something which really doesn't, ultimately mean that much, the control that has over people's behavior, I just find I'm in shock for the last year and a half. I knew some people would be very like that, but I didn't know 90% would. I just didn't know.
Yeah, I think it's about comprehending what death is. Like I've said this on the show many times, on my deathbed, hoping that I'm Contus Mentis, suddenly decide to leave here. And I've always said that will have that packed lunch on my shoulders and saying to my family, with it or dementia, whatever it may, in my 100th year, going, I'm ready. I'm out of here. I'm going to see what's next. And I've never had that fear. And through my journey over the last 20 years has the hardest thing, and I haven't mastered, and, that's where I think was one of our conversations we had was, with that meditation. But it's the hardest thing in this life is to sit still, because we have been conditioned to be bombarded, instant gratification, everything happening. Like even now, no ads, there's nothing. People want everything. Even though you say to someone, sit in silence for 15 minutes, and they go, oh yeah, it is so hard for people to do that because we've been conditioned.
Well, it is a feeling of death, and to fully go through the stages of how you're feeling and be honest with yourself and realize the masks that you are wearing or being forced to wear, it is like death. So they have made sure that people do not sit still, because you will alchemize into an authentic person. And the last thing that the systems require in this world is someone who is authentic, because it's a challenge to the entire infrastructure. We need people who are willing to mutate into whatever the system wants, who are willing to stand by and allow the system to cull or groom or abuse, the elderly, the children, or whatever, into what they want. I mean, at the moment, there is a very clear ideology that is like a steam train running through humanity, and they know what they believe, and they seem to be anti-life, anti-love, anti-free will. And it's a fascinating mentality. And when you look at it without judging it, you say, okay, this is a core belief system. These people believe that individual expression of human consciousness is not only worthless or wrong, but it's a threat to what they want. So what do they want? They want all of us to be, as they say, as above, so below, in a hive mentality, with no moral groundings, with nothing sacred, with no family values, with a real blur between the lines of what's male and female, with no natural conception or birth. And that is they want to tear down the individual in order to create their hive. And they know who they are. So then the question comes down to each individual to say, well, who am I? What is the benefit for me and the cost? And that's not what people aren't asking. So the benefit for adhering to the ridiculous narratives that we're being given is you will belong. You'll feel like, you're part of the system. They pay well. I mean, my God, they have paid well over the last 2 years to make sure that they're civil servants and they're, those that they need on their side, while they're basically smashing the vulnerable in society, are kind of kept bread and circus, fat and full. They know exactly what they're doing. So at the moment, it comes down to what it should have been at the very beginning of life, is each individual making a choice, either consciously or unconsciously, based on full awareness about the cost and benefit of either adhering and going along with this or standing alone. Now, standing alone, you can lose your job, you can lose your friends, you can lose your place in society. So, you can measure what you can lose. And on the other side, you can gain a lot by being part of the system in terms of measurable finance and social acceptance, etc. But if you don't understand, and I don't like the word, if you don't comprehend the cost to your being, your soul, your joy, your freedom, and your ability to live a full life, if you don't value that, or you don't even know that that has a value, well, then it must look crazy to anybody that you would stand against the narrative.
Yes, and that's it, isn't it? It's that standing against the narrative, because what's really happening, and let's look at history, let's jump all the way back. It's the system where they're trying to take that individual spirit mentality, free living, love away from everybody and push them to the side, and then have everyone following the system, the state. The state is your new divinity. The state is your new God.
Your new parent.
Your new parent, yeah. And there is where they want, and it's driving that. This is us. We know best. We are the parent. We are everything. And anything apart from that before is all make-believe. And one of the things, Lisa, which sort of, when I'm talking to people who are starting to, understand the ways of the world, we as human beings have been on this land way, way, way before any systems were introduced. And systems have always been introduced to control, to do better, but to control, or not to do better. But it was always someone was to gain from whatever was happening. And if people can really sort of understand that what's happening now, we spoke there in the beginning of the show about the Roman Empire and how that collapsed. History has a way of just repeating itself. And even though what's going on in the world is mind-blowing, technology has replaced bullets. And we don't know where the next couple of years is going, really and truly. We can only guess. But the people who are, we are complaining, giving out about the monkey, but it's the organ grinder who is really pulling it. They're 7-8 steps ahead. So we're on the back foot. But it's okay, because when you find who you truly are, none of their systems matter.
Have you ever met a billionaire? Have you ever looked into their eyes?
I think I have. Yeah, I'm sure I have met a billionaire, but
I've met one or two. One of them was Chinese and one of them was American. And I remember looking into their eyes, and I read recently that if from the time Columbus went to America, if you'd earned $5,000 every day since then, you still wouldn't be a billionaire, and you still wouldn't have as much money as Jeff Bezos earns in a week. Okay. So you look at Jeff Bezos, I don't know him, but what is he doing at the moment? He's flying up into space because he wants to get a different perspective on life. And I listened to that and I thought, you utter pathetic creature. If you want a different perspective of life, I'll take you down, to a single mother living on the street, or, you don't have to go out. They are so miserably unhappy. And this is not about money. What is going on? Money doesn't exist, Joe. I mean, that is one of the biggest. Money, language, and time are three inventions that have actually kept us all in a cage. They don't really exist. They've been imposed on us. But these people, it is not money that's driving them. I mean, the money represents our human energy, the currency, corrente. It's our human energy, and they're hoovering that up. But what hell do you live in when you have more money than some countries, and it's accumulating on a daily basis, and you possibly don't even get pleasure from closing your eyes and biting into an apple? Or what happens is you develop an envy, a phthónos, an envy of people who have nothing, and you see them, their face light up when you have all the resources in the world and you cannot feel joy. And when I look at some of the characters that are out there at the moment in the theater that it is, the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks, the Mark Zuckerbergs, and I'm not judging them as people, but I'm just observing when I look at their face, I don't see them light up. I mean, okay, Bill Gates smiles and laughs when he talks about people dying. That seems to kind of make him a little bit happy, which is strange in itself. But I don't envy them. I have no envy of these people. I have no envy of our politicians at the moment. I look at them individually, and I know some of them, and I've been in their company of some of the TDs. They are miserable. They are unhappy. They have no joy. I wouldn't swap places with them. They are actually the biggest slaves in the country because they're not serving the people. They're serving a beast. And when you said that it seems to be in human natural nature, something seems to come in and interrupt human civilization at different points. And it doesn't seem to be human. It's anti-human. And it starts to organize humanity into a kind of a pyramidical structure with the top and the down to the bottom, and hoovering up their energy. It's almost anti-human. Where does it come from? I don't know. But I know within the occult world, which I've studied a lot and I'm quite familiar with, they would develop what they call an egregore by doing certain ceremonies and pulling together. And they believe that they download some sort of an energy or a rite. Now, it may be a projection of their own desires, and then they justify it through ritual. But something certainly comes in and enters humanity at a certain point and tries to impose this structure on it, which is hive mind. And that's not natural to human spirit. So where does it come from? That's a whole other discussion.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
We always believe, energy goes where energy flows. And in this world that we are, this construct that we're in.
Energy goes where attention. If you put your attention, then energy goes there, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the vibration and everything as well. So collectively, collective consciousness within the world, because of we've been driven into fear and driven into lack of, that is that collective organic energy that is creating everything that's going on in the world at the moment as well. So reality is there's been a small amount of people who understand this, are feeding it out through the narrative and through directions and the systems, which then is triggering the normal man, woman, child in the world, which then is driving this collective energy to create what we are all doing. Exactly. So it's ourselves doing it, or it's creating it ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, again, that comes back to responsibility. And when we say we are creating it, it requires us to say, I am creating it. How am I participating? And the sense of helplessness over the last 2 years, people have said, well, what can I do? I mean, 50 Gardaí, 50 doctors, 50 teachers, 50 nurses, if they had got together in a group and spoken their truth, this could have stopped. And I believe that Ireland is very, very central to what's going on globally. We have a diaspora of 90 million. And when you look back on the history of Ireland, and I was actually right in the middle of the so-called Celtic Tiger, I was appointed to the Information Age Steering Committee by Bertie Ahern. I worked for Bill Gates during the 90s, and I went in from a humanist background, and my job was to open up the home and education market in Ireland. There was no technology as such in Ireland, although the companies began to position themselves here, and we had 90,000 desktops of unlicensed software in education, and there was no computers. And I think I look back at that time there and my experience going in as a humanist into a technology world and my naivety. And I remember being over in Seattle and Bill Gates, everybody was focused on Novell, fighting Novell as an enemy. And all our business plans were pointed that direction. And Bill Gates stood up and he said, I want you to stop what you're doing. And I want you to focus on the internet, because we could lose everything if we don't focus on the internet. And the company turned around in a matter of months, and Internet Explorer became the biggest market share. But I remember him standing up, making a W sign with his fingers, and thousands of Microsoft managers standing up and it's stamping Netscape.not, Netscape.not. And it was creating that egregore cult. And I was sitting down and I actually was shaking. I was frightened, the energy that was in the room. It was horrific. And one of my colleagues beside me looked down at me and he bent down and he said, have no doubt, you're in a cult now. And that was a shocking moment. I was then given a job to do, which was we were to put somebody into prison in the universities. Now, to identify who was to go into prison, because of the software theft that was going on. So you had 92,000 desktops in the 19 colleges at the time, and they weren't licensed. So they had the server and no licenses because they couldn't afford them. They didn't have the money from the government. And they were sending auditors over to America and sending out letters saying you have to pay. And I was looking after the education market. And when I looked at the university, I said, okay, well, who's responsible for this? Is it the poor IT guy who isn't considered an academic because there's a certain amount of elitism in the colleges back then? Is he responsible? Or is it the bursar who wouldn't even have a clue what a computer is? Or is it the president who doesn't have a dog's notion either? Who is responsible? But I felt the power. And obviously we got shares for doing our jobs and we got promoted. There was personal benefit to me to just go, okay, I'll do this. But I looked at it and I said, this is wrong. This is fundamentally wrong. And yes, a new law had come in the EU. But when you looked at the bigger picture, I didn't agree with doing that. So I brought the universities together and I said, can you give me one order and I'll argue for an OEM deal? And it was not in their nature to give one order and come together. But I remember being in that environment and thinking, this is a machine. And in Seattle, Bill Gates said, technology will lead and humanity will follow. And there was a look in his eye, and every single cell of my body knew that humanity was in danger. Every cell. They were coming up with solutions to problems that didn't exist. They were dictating how technology could be used in a way and they hated. He calls us humankind. They believe we are goyim, useless meat eaters. But there are rules that they tell us the truth and we have to consent. Everything is contract law. But I remember feeling the power that this corporation gave me if I put my values, if I put my conscience, and if I put my spirit aside, I would be a very rich woman today. But I think about that woman if she had done that, and she would be dead inside. And she'd be afraid to die, and she'd be wearing a mask, and she'd be clapping, and she'd have shares, and she'd have money, and she'd be one of the elite. And I do not envy her one bit.
There's the thing. this whole world that we are in, we'll discuss this at a later, why it is a construct. It's all an illusion. So if they are, calling, we are, bottom feeders, but we're all just spirits in meat suits, on this world. And I think if enough people can understand and unlearn everything and see what's going on, even a small amount, then whatever, the Bill Gates or the Amazons or the Musks and all the politicians and dictators around the world, none of that, their stuff matters if you start to really understand what the process is. And is it a case of how you play the game? That's really what it is. This is all just an individual process of what we project from within, we see out. And it's as we said, it's the collective consciousness feeding this. But if I stand back out of it and watch the stage and sitting in the audience and just observing what's going on stage in the public arena, you sort of really get hold of what's happening and kind of go, let them at it. Who chooses, let them at it. And those who don't, can we not just get on with our own lives and observe? Or do we have to participate?
I think we have to participate in the relationship we have with ourselves. And it's very easy to watch the theatre. And then as regards the game of duality is what keeps the atom together. And your opinion on matter then can come from that. Some people, think that their job is to escape matter. But life is a remarkable process of consciousness attempting to expand its wisdom through the experience of forgetting itself and trying to remember who it is in the face of such illusion and temptation. I think that's really what life is. So when you sit still, you realize that it is a constant effort to remain in your own observer and keep yourself on track. And the more you gaze inwards at how am I doing rather than what is happening outside, then when you go out, you wear your shoes much stronger and you know who you are. So you're in a better position to respond to it. But I think that we can't underestimate the effects of trauma. And, I remember 9/11, for example, and I was heavily pregnant at the time, and my ex-husband was a pilot, and we were very involved in aviation. And the idea that hijackers, because we would have been trained to deal with hijackers, and we were trained in Aer Lingus' cabin crew to keep offering them tea and coffee because they'd want to go to the toilet and keep making them make decisions. So do you want me to stand here? Do you want me to stand there? Will you have a coffee? Do you want milk? Do you want sugar? And it wears someone down. So we were taught these human techniques of dealing with the hijacker mentality. Never, ever did it occur to anyone that they would use the entire airplane as a weapon. So what happened, that was from an aviation perspective, but then globally, everybody had been a passenger. It was an absolute trauma experience and creation of a massive invisible enemy that turned out to be very profitable. I'm not going to get into that. I mean, but just in terms of trauma. And then since then, I think humanity have been kept in a traumatic stage, and they've really played on it this year. And when you're in trauma, in fight or flight or freeze, it takes a lot of, you need to practice on a daily basis when you're not in trauma of being able to stop time, connect in, ask yourself, what do I have? What do I want? What do I need? What am I afraid of? And how is that fear affecting me now? You need to practice this like a muscle from the day you're born, so that when a trauma situation happens, that you can go to that center of the tornado and find that peaceful center, which is always there. It's always there. And then I think what would happen is we become less engaged with the theatre and the game. I mean, I hear people saying, calling Leo Varadkar by his first name, like, Leo, don't do this, and Leo, they don't deserve to be called by first name. I will say here that government are traitors. I don't think we have an Irish government. The 33rd triumvirate of shame in there, they moved out of the Dáil and they pay 25,000 into a commercial center. They were telling us the truth. They're not a government. They're not here for the people. You know, they are serving an ideology which detests Ireland, detests sovereignty, detests individual, detests children, detests love, and it's reductive of everything down to currency. And they ought to be absolutely ashamed of themselves. And I don't think they can process their shame. So that's why they all look utterly dead inside.
Yeah, and it's true that why they've moved out of a so-called government building into a commercial, because they're not acting as a government, they're acting as puppets.
But they're telling you.
You know, as I said, monkey, it's the monkey, not the monkey grinder.
They're signed up to an ideology. And I think if people don't fully understand what that ideology is, it's like a neo-Gnostic transhumanism. So they believe that the natural evolution of man should be from individual to group, to hive, to machine, to AI, to create their own version of immortality without the torment of human flesh. Like, that's actually where they're going, and they're telling us that. That's not conspiracy. That's a business plan.
That is a business plan. But here it is. Okay, we can individually, we don't need to participate in this, or don't recognize it, or we don't consent to it. And going back then to us as an individual, do we have life purpose? Is there a purpose here for each and every person? Or, we talk about, what is my purpose? The biggest question that everybody asks in this world is, what is my life purpose? Do we have one?
I can't answer a we question.
An I
certainly have a strong sense of what life means. And it's the anchor and the core of who I am. And within that, then you are on a daily basis dealing with your own challenges and your own traumas and your own aspirations and confusions. But I would certainly say yes to that. I would say yes. I can't answer for anybody else, because it's only by being connected to something which is beyond space and time and the ability to explain, that gives you that knowing of who you are. And there is nothing that will tempt or threaten or flatter or fear me out of that. I wouldn't exchange it for anything else.
It is the biggest question that people ask. What is my life purpose? That's,
okay, well, I'll help. I'll give you a way of maybe being able, if people are asking that question, if you can sit down in a silent space and lengthen your spine and relax your shoulders and put the tip of the tongue behind the back of the top teeth and ground down your feet and become aware of your physical body, and then become aware of your emotional body, and then become aware of your thought body. And they're all subtle bodies that go inward like a tree. And then become aware of your heart. Now, becoming aware and observing, it is very important that you also add non-judgment and non-interference. So you literally just observe as it is. And then you ask yourself, what do I have right now? What do I want? What do I need? What am I afraid of? And how is that fear affecting me? And once you clear that space, then who am I? How can I serve? If not now, when? And it is a constant. You're not going to come to an answer at 3:30 on a Wednesday that sorts you out for life. That is a constant evolving experience. And the more you do it without expectation, the more you will connect to something that is so beyond words and so beyond time and so beyond money. And it's like dipping your finger into a painted bucket of peace, and it comes out and it gives you a sense of a smile. It gives you an inner smile, and then a courage which comes from the heart, and it gives you a clarity of thought, and you feel less fearful, you feel less judgmental, you feel more accepting. And then when you respond from that place, you'll find that the universe begins to dance with you, because alternatively, if you're in an ocean and the waves are crashing over you because they're making waves on purpose, they have a wave machine, and you're bobbing up and down. If an ocean with crashing waves is too much for any little person to deal with. So all you can do is take in a deep breath, observe the wave coming, dive down underneath, relax, and then come back up until one day you realize that the waves that are crashing over you are your own thoughts externalized in some, matter world. And that when you go down underneath, that you're dipping down into your true essence until eventually you realize that you are the ocean.
You're listening to Joe Dalton on Dublin South FM, Crossing the Rubicon.
Lisa, I want us to take a step back in time to the origins of the world, because when I started to really understand what creation was or is, it helped me understand what's going on today and how the construct was created. Still trying to figure out, part of the why. But let's start to give people an idea or, to comprehend, or a thought process to help them unlearn. And it starts with, in my opinion, the origins of the world. Adam, the argons, the angels, the whole caboodle. The floor is yours.
Wow, Joe, what a question. Lisa, tell us about the origins of the world. Okay, first of all, I've had a strange relationship with time all my life. I don't think time exists. So even the concept of the origin of the world is going into time. I mean, we do not understand what time is. They also don't know what gravity is. There's so much we don't know, but you can experience it. So you've been in situations where you want to kiss the woman that you love, and waiting can feel like an eternity, or you are waiting outside a courtroom door, and time changes. So the origin, we have stories that try to explain the inexplicable. But one of the things that blew my mind quite young was I discovered Max Planck and his double slit experiment. And he set up his experiment with the presumption that light is a particle. And he put two slits in by mistake. And then he realized that light can be also a wave, which is a potentiality. And the discovery that light can be a wave or a particle, depending on the observer, I couldn't believe that everybody in the universe wasn't talking about that. Like, that is incredible. So that means your consciousness is actually affecting matter. Matter derives from consciousness. Consciousness does not derive from matter. And that is a really important thing to start with. Now, as regards the stories, whether we go back into the Hinduism or any of the ancient cultures, or what we have in an Abrahamic world that we live in, the story of Adam and Eve, all of those stories are much, much older than we can imagine, but they are attempts that the mystics, the people who had Gnosis, which is knowledge through experience, which is beyond words, they attempted to explain to people, like, it's like that there is a formless shape in the room and you throw a gossamer cloth over it to try and give a concept of to what that form is, but it's ever moving. So the stories that we have about the creation are stories. And what they are supposed to do is to trigger a remembering inside you, which is beyond words. And when you get that, I always call that a BFO, which is a blinding feckin' obvious moment, and your heart kind of goes, and something makes sense at a level, like knowing goes from being a small K in your head, drops down into a large K knowing in your heart. And all of a sudden, for that split second, it's almost like everything disappears and you are one with the one in the one. And they are moments that I live my life for, when everything is in line. Like the word yoga is, what you think, what you say, what you do, and who you are all in line. And that sounds much easier in theory than practice.